560. The Answer.
So I was going to play, and Matt, hang on, I'm going to get to you. I was going to play for the lovely Mandy just the original cost of this Ivanpah, this fraud, this Obama thievery scam.
Why did the government fund a 5-square-mile laser death ray that kills 6,000 birds a year? That is Ivanpah, a solar farm in the Mojave Desert. And the bird apocalypse isn't even the biggest part of this boondoggle. So 15 years ago, Google, NRG Energy, and BrightSource Energy got together for this idea. They would sell solar power to PG&E and California Edison until 2039. But they needed funding. So Bechtel, who's a big government contractor, helped them get a $1.6 billion loan from the Department of Energy. See all those mirrors? Yeah, there's 350,000 of them, and each one is the size of a garage door. They reflect sunlight onto boilers 450 feet high as part of the solar thermal process. The project promised to create 1,000 construction jobs and power 140,000 homes. And that didn't happen. In theory, everyone would benefit, from workers and local communities to politicians pushing green energy. Now, the facility opened in 2014, and it didn't take long to realize that mirrors attract bugs and birds eat bugs, and mirrors themselves get really hot. The reflected rays at Ivanpah literally singed birds to death mid-air, leaving clouds of smoke called streamers. The project was also terrible for desert tortoises and destroyed irreplaceable, pristine desert habitat. But the real problem was about power. Ivanpah only operated at half capacity. Apparently, officials hadn't considered things like weather or equipment challenges impacting energy production. You know, like they should have. NRG said it could take years for Ivanpah to hit its annual energy goals. In the meantime, they'd use natural gas to operate the boilers. So much so that they even needed state approval to increase the gas limit. Turns out the sun didn't shine as much as everyone hoped, and the facility could no longer compete with newer, more efficient technology.
Like children. These are children, intellectually retarded children. Ooh, we're going to make a solar to be in the Mojave. It'll work. Wrong again, stupid. Matt, Mount Greenwood.
Hey, good evening, Sean. Yeah, I know people in the industry, and the other dirty little secret is that after these developers are greased, they'll go for about 10 years. And on the wind farms, those things last about 19 to 21 years. They go, they take that lease from the farmer, they build it, they win money for 10 years, they turn it, they flip it to another guy for 5 years, and then finally that guy flips it to the third company who's subsidized by the government. They know what's going to happen. They go bankrupt, and the poor farmer or the landowner gets screwed because they are responsible for removal of the tower, not the rooster head on top or the blade. Those have to be removed, and 2,500 gallons of oil, by the way. But they're responsible for the removal of the tower, all the concrete, all the underground infrastructure. They can't afford that. They go bankrupt. They lose their land, sell it for pennies on the dollar. As far as the solar farms are concerned, those things leak and leach heavy metals into the ground, which makes that once very fruitful land for growing food useless because it's all contaminated.
Hey, Matt.
It's a sick thing. That farmer sells it, goes bankrupt, and who buys the land for pennies on the dollar? The same scumbags who helped develop it.
So it just so happens that this weekend, this is what I did this weekend. I dove into about 3 different books that tackle this. The fascinating thing about all of this, all of it, all financed by big oil. Whether it's Rockefeller directly, whether it's the guy from Shell Oil, whether it's John Paul Getty, all of these entities, all of these green entities, all financed originally and to this day by big oil because it drives up the cost of oil. It drives up the profitability for all of the reasons you articulated. And every single one of them is a failure and a scam because it's intended to be. It's just a story told by liars and swindlers called politicians. And do you want to know something, Matt? This is since the beginning. I'm going to play a clip. You just gave me a great inspiration. I'm going to play a clip. Thank you for the call. 1992. I often play Paul Harvey. Chicago's very own. Lived in River Forest. One of the last times people in media had character and integrity. Paul Harvey, outside of AM 560 The Answer, I think he's the last mainstream guy to have any sense of integrity.
Goes by, but what some researcher tries to scare us or trick us out of research money by claiming that the sky is falling. And with the willing complicity of headline-hungry media, a recent crisis of the month had to do with global warming. An ozone hole is opening up over the United States, we were told, the effects of which were already measurable in an increase in skin cancer. On the contrary, destroying chlorine around the polar vortex has been declining since January. A major objective of a recent shuttle mission was to determine the scope and scale of the so-called ozone hole, and the silence since has been deafening from those whose livelihood depends on creating crises. Recent data from the Upper Atmosphere Research Satellites affirms that any problem is less, it's not greater. Ozone levels fluctuate all of the time, partly because of volcanic activity and solar flares. But MIT's Technology Review has made an exhaustive study of worldwide ocean temperatures since 1851, has concluded that there appears to have been little or no global warming over the past century. In fact, the net rise in world surface temperature during the last century, which was about 1%, almost all occurred before 1940, and that was before aerosols, and that has since been reversed. Former NASA chief Robert Jastrow and former Scripps director William Nierenberg, past president of the American Academy of Sciences, Frederick Seitz, all have concluded in a scathing rebuke of those who make money by predicting global warming, quote, if we allow ourselves to be influenced by press release, we could spend $1 trillion over the next decade destroying what's left of the American economy.
We spent $1 trillion over the last presidential administration. If we're lucky, might be upwards of 3 just on this scam. And it's fascinating when you look into it. When you say WWF, most people say, oh, the wrestling team? No. The original WWF, 1961.
Is WWF a reliable source for research? If you're wondering whether the World Wildlife Fund, or WWF, is a reliable source for research, you're about to get some clear answers. Let's break it down. First,
this is their video. This is their propaganda video.
The WWF is a well-established organization with a long history, dating back to 1961. It's the U.S. affiliate of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, which is headquartered in Switzerland. This global reach and foundation in science are key factors in its credibility. The WWF relies heavily on scientific research to drive its conservation efforts.
Poppycock. It was financed from the oil baron that started Shell.
In 1890, a man named Marcus Samuel started a small business in London, importing and selling seashells. Little did he know this humble beginning would morph into something much bigger. Fast forward a few years, and Samuel transitioned from shells to oil, shipping kerosene from the Far East to Europe. This was the birth of the Shell Transport and Trading Company. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, Royal Dutch Petroleum was making waves of its own. Founded by August Kessler and Henri Deterding, they struck oil in Sumatra, Indonesia. Now here's where it gets interesting. In 1907, these two powerhouses merged to form Royal Dutch Shell. This strategic alliance combined Dutch resourcefulness with British shipping prowess, creating a global energy titan.
And they financed the WWF in 1961. Along with the Rockefellers, along with Getty. This entire green energy scam is financed by big oil. And it always has been. And it reminds me, well, gee, that might be a point that nobody really cares. Really? You don't care? It's the same scam that Bill Gates does now. Same fracking scam. He not only owns farmland, he owns 3 fake meat companies. 3 fake meat companies. Make fake milk, fake guts. Bill Gates. Which is why he's at the forefront of this nonsense poppycock too.
Cows are about 5% of global emissions, which is pretty unbelievable.
Wild.
And if your goal is to get to 0, you don't get to skip the cows or the steel or the cement or, any of those big areas. Cows and other grass-eating species have a digestion system that emits methane. And methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. And so cows alone account for about 6% of global emissions. And so we need to change cows. So there's a whole class of solutions of making meat without cows. In terms of the cows, we pursued many solutions. So one is to vaccinate the cows in a way that their gut bacteria that emit the methane, which is the second most important greenhouse gas, you can vaccinate them and that species of bacteria isn't there.
And then you could pass the vaccines through the milk, but I'm more interested in your other scam.
Bill Gates' appeal coating has been approved to be used on organic foods. The problem is it contains mono and diglycerides and
I thought I had the one for the Impossible Foods. He owns the Impossible Foods. He owns the most farmland. Bill Gates has this entire fraud, which is why he sells the other end of it. He learned from big oil. And that's a scam that leads to trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in wasted money, like wind and solar. Mark, Monroe, Wisconsin.
Hey, Sean, I totally agree with you and your guest about the shutdown. It's pretty obvious that if we keep funding these fat cat bureaucrats, this $37 trillion deficit is just going to go up infinitely.
Have you now, Mark? You've been around a while, right? You've been around a while.
Yes.
How many?
Few days.
So in the 80s, we had 8 shutdowns. Bill Clinton, I think, shut the government down 3 times. I think old man Bush shut it down 2 times. George W. Bush shut the government down. Barack Obama shut the government down. The one common denominator is that the media would at least talk about the money and the debt. Have you heard on mainstream media the $38 trillion figure that is $30 trillion more than when Barack Obama was a state scumbag in Illinois?
Well, they're in bed with them, so obviously not.
I mean, to me, that's a staggering reality of just how deceptive this shutdown information is, because we're talking about federal employees that Joe Biden arguably employed 1.3 million government employees, federal workers, in his 4 years. 1.3 million. So until you fire 1.3 and 1 million, you haven't touched anybody who worked for the government when Donald Trump was the president the first time. Think about that. And that's the great scam, right? Because if you could put that obligation and guilt on the rest of Americans, they'll call for bankruptcy. And then you entice them with being in on the scam. After all, you could be a useless, no good welfare roach, and it's the equivalent of working 2 decent jobs. And in there lies the real scam. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, but if you could go 2.0 Doge in this situation, you should be able to shut down most of these bureaucrats.
Do you know what else is fascinating, Mark? When I do a lot of I do a lot of research on these oil barons, right? And all these Fabians and all of these control oligarchs and all of the people who worked for the world or worked to implement the UN, like Nelson Rockefeller or the World Health Organization, all these global entities. Do you know what they all shared, including Bill Gates? They all believed that our biggest problem was overpopulation. They're all practicing eugenics. They all wanted population control, every single one of them. And after all, these are all great entities to have that outcome. Thank you very much for the call. I mean, Bill Gates said it himself.
In this year's annual letter, Melinda and I take the toughest questions we get asked and give our answers. One that's come up for a long time is, as we make the world healthier, is the population going to get so big that feeding everybody and maintaining the environment is going to be impossible? Here we can see a chart that looks at the total world population over the last several hundred years. And at first glance, this is a bit scary. We go from less than 1 billion in 1800, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.4 billion where we are today.
Why is it scary? 7.4 billion people could all live in Texas with the density of Manhattan. What's so scary about that, you evil bastard? 312-642-5600.
This is the Sean Thompson Show on AM 560. The Answer.